is us, Rabbi Krustovsky?
So, what can I do for you, my young friend?
We came to talk to you about your son.
I have no son!
Oh, great. We came all this way and it's the wrong guy.
I didn't mean that literally.
The Simpsons.
Hello, and welcome to The Simpsons Countdown, the podcast in which we go back to the beginning and watch all of The Simpsons to trace the creative evolution of the series and count down, finding the exact moment in which it began its downhill journey into irrelevance. I'm Erix Antoine, and this week I'm joined by my good friend Chris Prentice. We'll be discussing Like Father, Like Clown, which originally aired on October 24th, 1991. It was written by Jay Kogan and Wallace Wolodarski, and directed by Jeffrey Lynch and Brad Bird. In this episode, Krusty reveals to the Simpsons that he is Jewish, and that his father, Rabbi Hyman Krustovsky, disowned him for pursuing a career in comedy. Bart and Lisa go on a mission to reunite Krusty with his estranged father. It's an inspired parody of The Jazz Singer, which features Jackie Mason in an Emmy-winning role as Krusty's father. Maybe not a lot of laughs, but certainly a lot of heart. Chris and I will be breaking it down after the break. So without further ado, here we go.
Who wants to say grace?
Why didn't we let our guests do it? Krusty, would you do the honors?
Well, all right. I'm a little rusty, but I'll try. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Oh, he's talking funny talk.
No, Dad, that's Hebrew. Krusty must be Jewish.
A Jewish entertainer? Get out of here.
Krusty, are you all right?
Yes, it's just that saying the bracha brings back a lot of painful memories. The old days. My father.
So this is Like Father, Like Clown, and
Right.
yeah, it was really cool to watch this episode again after many, many years. I had seen it, of course, before, but this was the show is taking on a new sort of edge to it.
When I was watching it again this time, I mean, again, like you, I haven't seen this in many, many years, and it's a really good episode, and I love that it gives us so much more about Krusty's history, and really develops that character, and it's the whole episode is based pretty much around him. But I wasn't really laughing all that much. I mean, there's a couple gags here and there. It was a pretty funny gag where he walks by the local Springfield adult movie theater. There's some pretty funny titles on the marquee there, but overall, I it's not really to me a very funny episode.
No, not in that sort of laugh a minute, way. It's more it's falling in line with the more sentimental episodes of the first season.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're a little more subtle, but the laughs that it has are very, for me at least, they were very big laughs. Part of it also is, I mean, I like Jackie Mason. I've always liked Jackie Mason. I think he's very funny. He's one of those comedians who's very much of his time.
Yeah.
And continues to be, but he's very much of his time. But when I was a kid, I used to find him funny, and although I'm not Jewish, I did grow up surrounded by my stepmom was Jewish, and so Jewish humor always appealed to me, and so all that stuff just sort of I've always found him funny. Maybe that part of it is that. There's a couple of other things, but I guess we'll be talking about it as we deconstruct the episode.
Yeah, well, like when it comes to Jackie Mason, like I've never really seen like his act. Like I've never, I know he was kind of known for doing like one-man shows in New York, and I mean I feel like he's more known as like for doing one-man shows than for doing like traditional stand-up, because I've never really seen his act. I mean, I kind of know him. I mean, I know he was in The Jerk, and he had the unfortunate occurrence of starring in Caddyshack II, so I've seen him in that, even though that he basically was kind of a last minute replacement when they couldn't convince Rodney Dangerfield to come back, and so they basically just wrote it for Jackie Mason, and then I remember that he had a short-lived sitcom like in the late 80s. It was called Chicken Soup, and it was like crazy hyped because it was the same production company that had done Cosby Show and had done Roseanne. And so, they were kind of like, it was the Carsey Warner group. And it was, basically kind of, hey, this is going to be the next big thing, surefire hit. And it really kind of flopped, and it, didn't even last a whole season. And so that's kind of all I really know Jackie Mason from, aside from voicing this character. That's about it.
Let's talk for a couple of minutes about Caddyshack 2.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not extensively, but there is one thing. So here's a hot take, and this has come up in the past in other conversations with friends that I've had, and I'm not a big fan of Caddyshack. I don't like the movie Caddyshack. Personally, I think that it's more about the jokes that it has and some memorable scenes than the movie itself holding together. I, to this day, cannot tell you what Caddyshack is even about. I can't tell. It has no plot. Or am I wrong?
Yeah. No, you're not wrong, and I'm with you halfway. I'm not a crazy Caddyshack fan either. I'm with you in terms of like, I really don't think, like, I think Bill Murray in that one is completely overrated. Like, the people that love that character, I think it's not that funny of a character, and I don't really think Chevy Chase's bits are all that great either. I don't really think they're that funny. What is funny in that movie is everything between Rodney and Ted Knight. Like,
Yes.
all those scenes, those are the best parts of the movie. Those always make me laugh. And so it's like, I'm with you halfway. The stuff that most people seem to laugh at, I think, is kind of dopey. But any of the scenes between Rodney and Ted Knight, they make me laugh quite a bit. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. But that being said, even though I'm not a huge Caddyshack fan, I don't think it deserved to have as bad a sequel as it did with part two.
Fair enough. I'm not going to say that Caddyshack 2 is a good movie by any stretch of the
Yeah.
imagination. But one thing that I will say, I think it has a plot. I remember it having more of a plot. Now, I don't know if that makes it good necessarily or whatever, but that's all I'll say. Like, it's a bad movie, but at least it has a plot.
I suppose so. There actually was, within the last few months, there was a really good article, basically one of those kind of oral history articles that Sports Illustrated did, about Caddyshack 2, and kind of how troubled it was and how much of a mess it turned out. And so, I mean, that was a pretty interesting read, and that's I feel like I know more about the behind the scenes of Caddyshack 2 than I recall about the actual movie itself.
Well, yeah, because you brought up the detail. Like, I wasn't even familiar with the fact that they tried to get Rodney Dangerfield to come
Oh yeah,
back. He said
yeah,
no, so they rewrote it for Jackie Mason. Like, I didn't even know that.
oh yeah. That was the whole thing. Is that they were they wanted somebody from the original to basically headline it, and they weren't going to get Murray back. And even though they did get Chevy for a brief amount of time, he wasn't going to be starring in it. So kind of the natural person was Rodney, and he was kind of coming off of back to school at that point, and I think they were offering to pay him a pretty good amount, but I think even Rodney basically said, this is garbage, this is crap. And I know that he got Harold Ramis to kind of polish the script up a bit before he had bailed on it, and so that's why Harold Ramis has a slight connection to part two. But yeah, then once Rodney was gone, they had to kind of find someone somewhat similar to basically headline it, and that's how they ended up with Jackie Mason.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because this is late '80s, mid to late '80s, and yes, Rodney Dangerfield was at this time a kind of he'd had a string of film hits.
Yeah,
He'd had Easy Money, he'd had
right.
Back to School.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of on the A list. He was kind of on that
Yeah,
weird.
yeah. Well, I mean, that was the thing, is that he had spent, he had been around such a long time before the '80s, but the '80s was kind of when he hit it big. He was basically like kind of almost a failed stand-up, you can almost say, for before that. I mean, he was on the Tonight Show a lot, but he had never really crossed over, in terms of in movies until the '80s. And yeah, Back to School was huge, and that was what kind of put him on that track of being But it's funny, it's like even after Back to School, he didn't really have another sort of starring role, I think. And then he had which I thought was a pretty good, about the only thing that I like about Natural Born Killers was when he showed up there. That's about the only interesting thing about that movie to me. But yeah, he just, the '80s was kind of his boom period. But I guess even he could smell that Caddyshack II wasn't the right move for him.
Ursula, leave me. You have brought shame on our family. Oh, if you were a musician or a jazz singer, this I could forgive, but this, I never want to see you again. You clown.
So this episode is a parody of the Jazz Singer.
Yes.
Pretty explicitly so. And I think it's a parody specifically of the Neil Diamond Jazz Singer. Because, I mean, okay, I've never seen the original Al Jolson Jazz Singer. I know of it. I'm familiar.
Yeah.
It's like the first talkie, whatever, but I've never seen it. And I haven't seen the Danny Thomas one from the '50s. The only one I've seen, the only one I'm familiar with, is the Neil Diamond one.
Yeah, I'm even worse than you. I haven't seen any of the versions. I mean, I know the basic story, and it's like I know of these different versions, but I haven't even seen the Neil Diamond one.
Well, the only reason I bring that up is because the Neil Diamond one, very famously, I mean, has Laurence Olivier as the dad,
Right.
as Cantor Rabinovich, and he has that very famous line where he goes, "I have no son," and so that's very lampooned, the way that Laurence Olivier kind of just, I think, was trumpeted in all the ads, and that's in this episode, the whole "I have no son" thing. Except Jackie Mason doesn't play up the whole "I have no son," but he still delivers the line very dramatically. So
yeah, it's it's one of those movies that I've always kind of heard about, because I mean, I guess it's maybe the only one. As far as I know, it's the only one that Neil Diamond starred in, unless I'm forgetting something. And
I don't think he'd made any other movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't think that. I mean, as far as I know, that one was kind of a flop and wasn't really a big favorite among the critics at the time. But yeah, it's just one of those movies I never really got around to seeing. But I mean, I know that I know the basic story, and I know that this episode is basically a parody of it. But yeah, in terms of like specifically what is similar between the movie and this episode, I don't really even know.
Well, yeah, just the basic plot line, really. I mean, that's really all that's what it boils down to. They don't, but that's really the only real similarity. They make a nod to it, right? Where he goes like in the flashback, like, if you were a jazz singer, like, but this.
So they explicitly state what they're parodying. So, but in terms of like the specific, like you mentioned, how that line about "I have no son," which I think that is one of the funnier moments in the episode, when Bart's like, "Oh, we even have the wrong guy. We gotta get out of here."
No, the episode does have some funny things. For me, the one thing that they got away with, which I think it's a very funny gag, it's the double entendre, the masturbation gag. where he's pounding on the bathroom door.
Oh,
Like,
right.
what are you
Yes.
doing in that bathroom? Open the
Yes.
door this instant. And then just like he opens it just in time to see the squirt come out of the
The
seltzer bottle. And
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it's
for prime time, animated television, on network TV. That's actually a pretty good gag to get away with, to be honest. Now thinking about it.
yeah. I mean, little kids won't get it.
No.
There's a certain subtlety to it, I suppose. But if you're, if you're paying attention, anyone teenage and up will get the gag.
Yeah, well,
will get that
there's
information too.
there's a lot of, I mean, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, between that and the, walking by the adult theater, and then also Krusty's attempt to call into the party line, there's a lot of racy humor in this one.
Yes, yes, there is. The
Yeah.
party line is also very funny. The whole,
Oh, that is good.
Apu, like, are you a beautiful woman? Like, do I sound like a
Yes.
beautiful woman?
Yeah. There's definitely funny parts. I mean, I just felt like overall, compared to some of the other ones that I've kind of been rewatching now, the overall humor isn't quite there for this one. And I wonder if part of that is because this one is very light on Homer. There's not, aside from like the beginning, there's just where, Krusty goes to the house.
Oh, yeah,
There's
Homer's
there's
barely in it.
Yeah, he's just
Yeah.
not, which is odd, for especially at this point, because I think by now, in this point of the third season, it's like Homer's kind of the meal ticket, and Homer is kind of the what's driving the engine, more or less. And so it was kind of weird watching an episode that had so little of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's kind of do a little. Let's go back in time a bit. We got to remember that at this show hadn't quite become the Homer Simpson show yet. It was still the Bart Simpson show generally.
Yeah.
It's like they were discovering. They were still trying to sort of discover how the show would work best. And I
Yeah.
think that, like, this is the season where they really start to do that. They really start to they realize that it makes more sense to start to shift focus more towards Homer, because it opens them up to tell more interesting stories. There's more things you can do with Homer than what you can do with Bart. Bart's a kid, so you can't.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do with him. And
Yeah.
also they start to see that they've already, over the first 2 seasons, they've built a world out of Springfield with all these supporting characters that they can mine for humor and for interesting stories. And maybe this is the first one where they really do that. You have this story that really focuses on Krusty. You said there's not a lot of Homer, but basically this whole entire episode revolves around Krusty. He takes center stage. He's basically the protagonist of the episode. And
Yes.
and so it does flesh him out, I think, genuinely. Gives him dimension, and
Oh, yeah.
and in a way it paints him as a really lonely man. And that's
Oh.
very poignant. He's believably a very lonely man.
Well, yeah, obviously calling into the party line, and then there's lots of other moments of showing just how depressed he is, which is kind of a side that we don't typically see of Krusty, because usually Krusty kind of comes in, he takes a pie in the face, or has some kind of obnoxious line, and then that's it. But yeah, that is really the best thing about this episode, is just expanding on him and giving us a more of a look at him as a character. And kind of what watching this again reminded me of was that for the longest time, while during this era of the show airing, it seemed like there was always a lot of talk of them doing a Krusty spinoff. Like, that was kind of at some point there's going to be a Krusty spinoff, and that he just seemed like the most logical character. That, okay, well, this is a big runaway smash show. What else could we do, and could we create a new series out of this? And it was always kind of figured that it would be a Krusty spinoff, which never actually obviously happened. But it's watching this episode kind of brought back those memories of always being that kind of rumor that eventually there's going to be a full-on Krusty series.
Well, I mean, I had no idea. I didn't know about that. And now that you mention it, that makes total sense. I mean, if you look at this episode, it almost functions like a backdoor pilot for
Yeah.
what could be like a Krusty-centered show.
Oh
It
yeah.
even brings up supporting. I mean, okay, obviously it goes into his backstory. So a Krusty show could revolve around him, his relationship with his dad. Uh, you've got the secretary that's in love with him,
That's
which
right.
is
Miss Penny Candy.
yes, Miss Penny Candy. Which okay, so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
I mean you have that. She's like in love with him, and you go and unless I'm missing something, I don't think we see Miss Penny Candy again.
Not that I recall. No, no. I think that's just a one episode gag. Obviously a parody of the James Bond character, and you see them once, they do the gag, and then that's the end of it.
Some intriguing guest stars for a children's variety show. I mean, at the start of this episode, you see him thanking Donna Mills from Knots
Ye-
Landing for
Yeah,
for
yeah.
being a good sport.
That's right.
I was like,
Yeah,
okay.
it's funny because Knots Landing. It's like it's one of those shows that it's like who on earth thinks of that show now? And I don't even know who was even thinking of that show when it was on. It seemed like it was one of those shows that seemingly was on for like 10 years that I don't know if I ever knew anybody that actually watched it.
And you were right; it was on for about 10 years. It's spin
Oh
off of
yeah,
Dallas,
right.
and I think it was still airing around this time.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it lasted till about 93 or something, 94.
Oh yeah. No, it
I
was
wasn't a regular
on.
viewer of it, but I was aware that it existed. But
Yes, it was
yeah.
on forever.
At first, I thought to myself, well, that's kind of weird. They would have like Donna Mills on this children's variety show, but then it dawned on me they had stars like that on Sesame Street.
That's right.
So
Yes.
you never know. I mean, they had Mel Gibson and Danny Glover on Sesame Street promoting Lethal Weapon 3.
Well, they
Uh,
had on the 20, I think it was the 25th anniversary of Sesame Street. Pesci was on it. Yeah,
so
they must have really been big on Lethal Weapon.
so Portrait of a Lonely Man, Krusty, realistically lonely, goes to dinner at the Simpsons house and he becomes the dinner guest who doesn't want to leave.
Yes.
And there's this pathetic quality to that where you're going, man, yeah, they really want, Bart really wanted him there, but then like by the end of it, Bart can't wait for him to leave, and that scene is so uncomfortable. You feel that like
Yeah.
you feel uncomfortable for the character.
Well,
It's
and
it's
then
palpable.
and poor Millhouse is in tears. Yeah, he just wants to go home.
And then, Krusty puts on the concert from Bangladesh, which, in case anybody knows, it's like I think that's like a 3-disc album, that goes on and on. It's it's like a '60s thing. It's got like George Harrison and a whole bunch of other people. It's like this massive, massive album that just goes on for hours. So
Yeah, well, doesn't that involve who's the guy that played the sitar? I just know that he's in reality Nora Jones's father.
is it Ravi Shankar?
That's right. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Ravi Shankar, right? Yeah. News to me again. I had no idea of that familial connection between them.
Yeah.
And then comes the scene that you're talking about, where he's like walking past the porn theater, whatever it is. There is this funny bit. What I don't get, like Krusty is feeling so down that he goes to does he go to sleep in a bus station?
Well, he's watching TV in the bus station, right?
Right,
He's
which is
got
weird
like
to me. Why doesn't he just go home?
Well, I mean, he just wants to be out among somebody. I guess he's
Yeah.
that lonely, and so he's just watching the coin operated TV in the bus station, which I don't know if that was a thing that was more like an East Coast or a Midwest thing, because I don't remember ever seeing coin operated TVs anywhere growing up on the West Coast. I mean, I know I've seen those in movies before, but that was just never something that I have ever seen in my life.
Well, I'll tell you, they certainly had them at LaGuardia or JFK Airport when I was growing up back in the 80s. I
Okay.
did remember a couple of times went to the airport, and as you know, yeah, they were coin operated. I even remember using one of them because
Okay.
once we were going to say goodbye to to a family member to the airport, and it was a long wait. And I think back then they actually let you go into the gate. Like you could go as far as the actual departure gate with the person.
Wow.
This is way back when. At least that's how I remember it. Like we could actually go into the terminal with the person we were saying goodbye to. And I do remember that this was on a night when on TV they were going to show one of my favorite movies back then, and still now, Cloak and Dagger.
Oh,
And
yes.
I remember very vividly that, I was just going because whatever, I'm a kid and we have to go to the airport.
Sure.
And I sat there, I asked for a couple of quarters and I watched Cloak and Dagger at, I guess it was either LaGuardia or JFK Airport using one of the coin operated TVs. So that is very real. And I had no idea that it was maybe uniquely a East Coast or Midwest thing.
No, I mean, for all I know, they were on the West Coast. I didn't spend too much time in airports. I never really saw them growing up anywhere like that. That whole, I mean, I've only ever seen those in movies and TV shows as the coin TVs. I mean, I always kind of associate that more with like the peep shows and oh, you gotta drop the quarter and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like in a bus station or an airport, I never saw anything like that growing up.
Yeah, and what I wonder is how long they lasted. Because I mean, yeah, certainly they don't exist anymore. Like you're not going to find them anymore, obviously.
No, no.
But because they're over. But I wonder how long they went on because this aired in '91,
Right.
so one would think they still existed then. And I'm going to guess they probably existed for a few more years into the 90s. I wonder when the cutoff time came, when it was like, all right, that's it for coin-operated TVs.
I vaguely recall a segment that Conan O'Brien did kind of early on when his late night show first started. So this, probably would have been 94, 95, where I believe it was Houston, and he went to the bus station in Houston to see if people were watching his show in the bus station. And that was kind of the whole gag, was who is here at 12:30 in the evening and who is watching me at the bus station. But it's just one of those things that I've just never come across in real life, or the coin operated TVs.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I would want to ask if anyone's listening to this who knows, please write in the comments, let us know, send us an email, whatever it is. But because I'd be curious to know how long they lasted. I'm wondering if they lasted as long as like well into the 2000s, into the aughts, where once smartphones started to become more ubiquitous, and then people just had that to entertain themselves. So why would they spend money on a TV? So I think maybe that's when logically you'd think they would go away. But I mean, I would wonder when it was.
Maybe they went away in that brief period of about 2005 to 2007, where the portable DVD players made their play. Maybe that was when they finally were gone, and everybody kind of had a portable DVD player that they used once, and then it just basically was thrown into a closet.
Yes, you mean the ones with the flip up screen, right? That had a little
yeah.
TV screen on it, so you could watch a movie on your little
Yeah.
portable DVD player, take it on trips. So yeah, whenever that showed up, and that was probably late '90s also.
Well, I feel like the portable ones, that was a big thing in like the mid 2000s. Like that's where every place was selling portable DVD players, and that was like a thing where people were like, oh gosh, you got to have one of these. If you go camping or you go on a big road trip, you got to have. And everybody, and then you had that Pimp My Ride show on MTV, and everybody was getting the DVD players in the car.
Right.
So, for whatever reason, that was, and then you'd be driving down the freeway and you'd notice somebody has a TV going or some kind of screen going, and then you were like, what the hell are they doing in there? But yeah, I feel like that was just a very brief period of history, and maybe those are what put the coin operated bus station TVs out of business.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Yeah, well, so we've established that maybe this isn't one of the funniest episodes, but one of the biggest laughs for me and you might agree because this is also very much visual humor. And Brad Bird co-directed this episode.
Right.
He didn't direct the whole thing, but the actual director was a first timer, so Brad Bird kind of stepped in to help him out. And reportedly, Krusty is, or was at the time, I don't think Brad Bird is still working on the show, but at the time he was. And Krusty was his favorite character, so he always wanted to at least animate one scene that featured Krusty. And I'm almost certain that it was this scene. And it's the scene in which Krusty loses his shit over the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon.
Yeah.
That is a genuinely funny scene because he's watching this gory cartoon of like Scratchy and his son being murdered
right.
by Itchy and his son.
Yes, Field of Screams.
Yeah, Field of Screams, and it's a fairly grotesque cartoon, of course, like all of them are. But just the way he's so touched, and he's like asking the kids, "Wasn't that beautiful? Wasn't that a beautiful cartoon?" And then just starts
that's that whole sequence of him breaking up after the cartoon is definitely one of the funnier bits, and he almost has a bit of a Scrooge look to him in that scene, where kind of when Scrooge gets a little bit, I mean not Scrooge, I mean Grinch, the Grinch, he kind of has a bit of a Grinch quality where he, just the way that his eyes go kind of reminded me of the Grinch. But yeah, that I would bet that's probably one of the parts that Brad Bird had the most influence on.
Yeah, the way he's like his lip, his mouth starts quivering when he starts to break down, and then like he can't. Right. That is very, very funny. Okay, so now here's something that I wanted to throw out at you, see what you thought about this. Okay, so based on the flashbacks, there's a couple of things, obviously. So he grew up in the quote-unquote Lower East Side of Springfield. That's such a... I love how Springfield is just this all-purpose town. You know what I mean?
Well, whatever they need,
it's everything.
Whatever part of a city, of any other city that you need, there is a version of it in Springfield at any given moment.
And yeah, I mean, the Lower East Side of Springfield, so you have that whole scene where he's like walking down the street with his dad, and that's clearly a parody of Godfather 2.
Yes.
And like people are just walking up to the rabbi asking for advice. And he's like, yes, yes. And then, but once Krusty's, can I be a clown? No.
Yes.
So like in any case, like that's funny. But my point is that we see that he went to school. We see that Krusty went to school, clearly. He was raised by a rabbi. He almost certainly was made to read the Torah growing up. Okay, sure. I would imagine. So it doesn't really make sense that he's illiterate. You know what I mean? It doesn't quite gel. I don't know. I mean, they make the point of reminding you of that in this episode. It'd be one thing if they totally retcon that fact, right? That we in the previous episode, the big one about Krusty gets busted, we learn he's illiterate, etc., and that's one of the things that ends up exonerating him. However, and you thought, okay, maybe they retcon that, but in this episode they make a point. Oh yeah, guess what? He's illiterate because when Miss Moneypenny shows him that Miss Penny Candy shows him the letter and he can't read it. He tries to read it and he can't read it. So okay, he's illiterate. They're keeping that there, but he's illiterate. I mean, he went to school. He was raised by a rabbi. I don't know.
No, it's a definite flaw in the logic of the Krusty character. I think that's absolutely for certain, because yes, if he grew up in that household, there's no way that he's not going to know how to read with that father. So yes, that's true, and there's really no way around it other than it's just a logical error for that character.
Yeah, it's just a fallacy, and I don't know if they keep the whole illiterate thing going.
I remember whatever the episode was, where he. This is later on, where he's recording the sound bites for the Krusty doll, and he goes into the recording studio. He's got them all on a card, and he basically reads off all of the, hey, I'm Krusty, hello, hey kids, whatever, blah blah blah, and he just 1 2 3, bing bang boom, I'm out of here. So I mean, he must have learned to read, in order to prepare for that.
Right, that too. So like all this stuff. Because, and that's to your point. I mean, because you could argue, well, I mean, he's got a show. He obviously has to memorize lines. he would have to have cue cards. But no, I mean, we could imagine that maybe when he does his show, he's just very good and he has the scripts read to him and he just remembers lines, whatever it is. You could believe all of that. However, in that episode that you're talking about, which is a couple of seasons down the line, when he goes into the recording studio, he's got little index cards that have all the lines on them. So he's like flipping them off. He's reading them. So he's not illiterate
yeah,
anymore.
absolutely. No. So I mean, it's funny. It's like I didn't really even think about that as I was watching the episode, but that's 100% true. As they really kind of contradict themselves with this one, going back to when he was basically they said that he was illiterate. So yeah, that's just one of those things. It's animated cartoon history, and I guess they're thinking, well, in order to make this episode work, we're just going to kind of gloss over that fact about the character.
Yeah. I mean, there is one. It wasn't until this episode that they decided to even make him Jewish.
That's right.
When they were pitching ideas for stories, and they came up with, and the writers really wanted that. And when they pitched it to one of the showrunners, to Sam Simon was like, nah, I don't know if I like that idea. But James L. Brooks said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And so, this episode, I would say that James L. Brooks might have had a little bit of a hand in it because it has that sort of smiles through tears, dramedy aspect to it.
It's a much more terms of endearment kind of episode. You can see, oh yes, the person behind broadcast news had a big hand in this one, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense because it's not fall down funny. It's just more kind of heartwarming and just kind of nice, and it has its laughs, but it is to me somewhat different from the usual episodes of this era. I mean, they obviously they would always every now and again have these sort of episodes that maybe pulled on the heartstrings a little more than usual, but that to me that's the strength of this episode more than the actual gags.
And here's another detail that I'm a little bit confused about. So towards the end, when Bart finally breaks down Rabbi Krustovsky, is he referring to Krusty as the Candyman, or does he mean Sammy Davis Jr.? Because I don't know if he gasps, the Candyman, after being thwarted by the quote from Yes I Can.
Right.
Now it should be noted that Sammy Davis Jr. had a genuine hit in the 70s with his cover of the Candyman song from the Willy Wonka movie. So from the original Willy Wonka movie. So I wonder, when he says the Candyman, does he mean Sammy Davis Jr.?
That's how I took it. It is that he, as soon as Bart mentions that name, that's what flashes into the rabbi's head is the Candyman. That's basically how I took it. Is absolutely he's thinking immediately of Sammy Davis. That might be the only song that I associate Sammy Davis Jr. with. I can't even really name other. I mean, again, he's from a different era than
Sure.
I am, and he was. I don't associate too much with Sammy Davis Jr., but that's probably the one song that yes, that's a Sammy Davis Jr. song, is the Candyman. So that's I can't even think of one other song that he's really even known for.
To be honest, I've only ever really associated him as part of the Rat Pack.
The Rat Pack. There's the little guest spot on All in the Family.
Yeah.
There's the movie he did with Gregory Hines, Tap, and that's more or less, at least for me, that's what I associate him with. I mean, I know that he did all kinds of stuff, and all those guys made all kinds of movies back in the 60s, and he was one of the biggest entertainers of that time, but Candyman is really the only song that I think of when I think of Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd have to say you're right. I think I'm right there with you. I can't. If you were to ask me right now, I wouldn't know any other songs that he sings. I'm sure he's had plenty of hits.
Oh,
but,
tons.
but I certainly would not be aware of any of them.
Yeah, it's a little different from like Sinatra, where I can think of all kinds of different songs, but it just whatever Sammy Davis Jr. was best known for singing at the time, it hasn't really resonated with me.
All right, so I mean, what's our final word on this episode? Is there anything else that we have not discussed that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I mean, I would say that I guess it's kind of notable that he won an Emmy for doing this character.
Yeah, he did. He's one of the few, because he's one of the few guest stars who's won an Emmy. He won an Emmy. I think Kelsey Grammer has won an Emmy for playing Sideshow Bob. So yeah, well deserved though, because it's a good performance.
Oh yeah.
He creates a very memorable character. For
Oh
sure.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a perfect combination of an animated character with an actual, a real flesh and blood human's voice. And so, I mean, the combination is outstanding, and it's, again, one of the most memorable parts of this episode. Yeah, it's hard to imagine anybody else that would have hit quite the same note than he does in this one.
Right, because he was an ordained rabbi. That's
Yeah.
something else that I was not aware of. That he's an ordained rabbi. So
Yeah.
I was not. I was just totally surprised by that fact about Jackie Mason.
Yeah. So, like, have you ever actually seen any of his actual act ever?
I've seen clips. I've never seen a full thing. I'm sure they're all like available on. I'm sure people can find them if they want to look for them. But I have seen clips. I've seen clips of his act. I've seen clips of him on like whatever, the Tonight Show, or I mean, I've seen clips of him throughout the years. But yeah, I've never seen a full special. And you're right. What you said at the top about him being much more of a one-man show type of guy than like a stand-up in the traditional sense. Because I mean, he comes from that old style. He comes from the whole like Catskills comedy kind of thing.
Right.
So that's his tradition.
Yeah. Well, I kind of remember. I vaguely remember that back in the again late '80s or early '90s, he kind of got into some trouble because he sort of made some disparaging comments about David Dinkins, who was the New York mayor of the time, and I remember that being kind of a deal at the moment, that he had said some not so great things about David Dinkins, and that kind of hurt him in terms of becoming more mainstream, because at that point he was making those inroads. I mean, he'd had that sitcom that, even though it bombed, it was at least kind of big exposure for him. And but yeah, he had made some not so great remarks about Dinkins, and that sort of cooled him down quite a bit, I think, in the 90s.
Yes, he referred to him by the Yiddish word for black man.
Okay.
That's as far as that, and I think he used that same term to refer to Obama at some point. And
okay, wow.
But that same term is spoken. That same term is spoken by Mel Brooks in Blazing Saddles, in the flashback scene where the Native Americans kind of surround the stagecoach.
Right.
And then eventually let them go, because I mean it's Native Americans who speak Yiddish, or at least that one, the Mel Brooks one.
Yes.
And my personal view of all that is that yes, it's inappropriate for Mel Brooks to be playing a Native American, if we want to be honest about it. However, it is funny, so like I'm not.
Well, and then
it's a funny
scene. That's also kind of, I think, a bit of a parody of the fact that a lot of Westerns were actually made with Jewish actors playing the Indians, essentially.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
that happened
or Mexicans in the case of Eli Wallach.
Right. Well, that's one of the jokes in Barton Fink, when with John, where John Turturro, when he kind of arrives on the scene, they think, oh, you're set to play an Indian in what film now, or something to that effect, because they
Right.
they don't think that he's one of the writers. So I think that was kind of what Mel Brooks was sort of sending up with that part in Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. In any case, in that case, it's specifically done for humor. In the case of Jackie Mason, I suppose not entirely humor. He just made some slightly off-color remarks, just being And as far as I know, in later years, because he used to be a Democrat, in later years he became a Republican. And as we know nowadays that's a no-no in the public entertainment sphere. That is an absolute no-no. So yeah, I mean, I guess he's done.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time that I saw him in anything, or even interviewed or in any capacity at all. So,
Yeah.
but he's also he's got to be, if not in his 90s, pretty close to his 90s. So I doubt he's really clamoring for a lot of work anyway.
Yes, Jackie Mason is 92.
92.
As of this recording, he is
Wow.
he is a fresh-faced 92.
Wow.
So yes.
Yeah. So he's probably not looking for a Netflix sitcom of any kind,
or special.
Or special. Yeah. Oh boy. Everyone else has had one. I at this point, maybe he should probably have one. I think at some point every comedian has been legally obligated to have a Netflix special. So, but why not him?
Rabbi, did not a great man say, and I quote, "The Jews are a swinging bunch of people. I mean, I've heard of persecution, but what they went through is ridiculous. But the great thing is, after thousands of years of waiting and holding on and fighting, they finally made it." End quote.
Oh, I never heard the plight of my people phrased so eloquently. Who said that, Rabbi Hillel?
Nope.
It was Judah the Pious.
Nope.
Maimonides.
Nope.
Oh, I got it. The Dead Sea Scrolls.
I'm afraid not, Rabbi. It's from Yes I Can by Sammy Davis Jr., an entertainer, like your son.
The Candyman.
So that's it for this week's installment of the Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, consider showing your support. It's really very simple. Give us a like or a favorable rating. This podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, and other podcasting platforms. So adding a brief review, if possible, might actually help boost the podcast's profile. And if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends on social media. Speaking of social media, you can follow the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook or subscribe to it on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet, and feel free to find me and follow me on Letterboxd, where I frequently post film reviews you may or may not agree with. I'm Erix Antoine, and I'll be back next week to discuss Treehouse of Horror 2. In some ways, this is kind of the underdog of the Treehouse of Horror series, has its fair share of moments, but I'm not sure it's as widely remembered as some of the more classic ones. Maybe it should be. Anyway, the Penske Files' Clay McCormick will be sitting down with me to talk about that, and I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stay safe out there. See you next week.
The Amatic 9-inch portable DVD player brings your videos to life with its 180-degree tilt and swivel screen, which provides the optimum viewing. Shh!